story. More things happening in northern Israel, including the IDF confirming the arrest of a senior Hezbollah commander, Navy commander, who is apparently being questioned in Israel right now. Here's more of a wrap-up of the actions in the north by our correspondent, Emma Siegel.
As hopes for a U.S.-led ceasefire have faded in recent days, fighting has escalated dramatically between the IDF and Hezbollah. Israeli naval commandos conducted a raid in northern Lebanon last night. The IDF has confirmed that the Israeli Navy Shayatet 13 commando unit carried out the operation, capturing a Hezbollah official. The operative, Imad Amhaz, is considered by the IDF to be a, quote, significant source of knowledge in Hezbollah's naval force. The IDF says Israeli soldiers arrived on the coast of Vatron and raided a chalet near the beach. Amhaz was taken from the building by the commandos, and they left the area using speedboats, according to Lebanese media reports. And today, Lebanese media is reporting an Israeli airstrike in Beirut's southern suburbs of Dahia, a Hezbollah stronghold. This as residents of northern Israel faced yet another turbulent night as a rocket attack from Lebanon injured 19 in the Arab-Israeli town of Tira. Several of the 19 were trapped in the building hit by rocket fire and were rescued by firefighting teams.
After the boom, I made sure that my children were fine. We went out and saw dust, children screaming, women screaming, and everyone went to the house that was struck. You can see here behind me the amount of damage the house sustained. We were able to evacuate and rescue those who were inside the house, and thank God we were blessed that there was no one killed.
Tira is the second Arab town in a week to be hit by Hezbollah rockets.
I want to reach out to all the leaders. It is enough. We had enough. We want peace. The people are paying a heavy price. Today, Tira was spared by a miracle. And I hope there won't be more killed in this war. We have been bleeding for a year, and there are no solutions, no tools, nothing.
The IDF says it has struck the Hezbollah rocket launchers used in the barrage that hit Tira. But over a year now into the fighting, residents of the north have little optimism that an end to the hostilities are in reach.
We're now going live to I-24 News correspondent Balir Sladin, who is in northern Israel with the latest there. Good evening, Balir. What could you tell us?
Yes, in terms of the special operation in the north of Lebanon, in the area of El Patron, and we're talking about the Christian area, security sources told our colleague, our I-24 News colleagues today, Matthias Enbar, that the senior Hezbollah official that was arrested by Shayatet 13 is a scientist, actually, and a commander in the organization's naval force, and has also developed means for Hezbollah in recent years. And he added also that he apparently is being investigated right now on Israeli soil, and we're talking about 40 kilometers north of Beirut, so 140 kilometers from the northmost Israeli point. This is a special operation, and I can say also from the Hezbollah's point of view, it's a different story. First of all, they're denying it, they are being skeptical about it, but on the other hand, they are saying that if that even happened, then we're talking about the coordination between the IDF and the UNIFIL force. They are criticizing the UNIFIL force that was supposed, according to them, to prevent the Israeli force to do this landing operation, the special operation on the coast of Lebanon. And they are saying that this is only because of them, and they're denying Israel this huge achievement, let's say, in military terms.
Right. Also, Balir, listen, I mean, every day there have been incursions crossing into Israel. We know that, something happened, obviously, landing in central Israel. What has it been like this evening? Quiet, or have there been some explosions?
For the past few hours, relatively quiet, but this morning wasn't quiet. Actually, since yesterday's evening, so during the Shabbat, the Jewish Shabbat, we're talking about 159 rockets that were fired during this weekend, and also 10 drones. Most of these rockets were intercepted, other fell in open areas, but of course, you've mentioned the report, the missile that hit that house in Tira. We're talking about a number of people that were injured. 2 of them are in a moderate condition, and from sources from Tira are telling me that they are not, fortunately, in a life-threatening condition. And out of the 10 drones that were fired, 7 were intercepted. Other 2 of them fell in open areas. one hit actually backing house near Nahariya, specifically in Akhziv, and caused immense damage to that packing house. Unfortunately, one more time, that happened during Shabbat, because during Shabbat, of course, that packing house doesn't work. If that would have happened in midweek, we would be talking about maybe a number of casualties as a result of that. And also, on the other hand, the IDF is announcing that they have killed the rockets and missiles commander in the Nasser unit, which is responsible for the western area of the border. So we're saying that the IDF is continuing their operation inside Lebanon in many ways, but on the other hand, we're still being hit by this number of these large barrages of rockets.
All right. Thank you very much. I-24 News correspondent Balir Sladin. Now we're joined in studio by Yaakov Lapin, a military and strategic affairs analyst for the Miriam Institute, and I-24 News correspondent Nicole Zedek. Obviously, as always, a lot to talk about. First, let's talk about this commander, this naval commander. Obviously, there's a lot the IDF is doing every day. Why is this guy, such an important figure that they're bringing him into Israel? Nothing was eliminated. Why?
So Imad Fahuz has been named as the senior member of the Hezbollah naval branch that has been taken into Israeli custody. The only reason they could justify risking Israeli Navy commandos in order to go deep into enemy territory and to take an individual like him is because of intelligence. He must have information about the workings of his unit, about the weapons, about the plans, and it is therefore worth the risk to send in naval commandos into this area in order to take him in the middle of the night, because he is going to, according to the hopes and assessments, spill the beans on the plans that Hezbollah has.
Hence why they took him alive.
Right, exactly. Now, this unit that he's a part of, it can do a host of things such as launch surface to sea missiles, shore-to-sea missiles at Israeli gas rigs. It can target the Israeli Navy. It can send basically bomb-laden bombs and ships. There's a whole host of attacks that they have been working on. So my assumption is that they want to find out what this unit is planning, and that is why he's in Israeli custody rather than being the target of an Israeli airstrike.
This is different than what we've heard, but it doesn't mean that there haven't been, other things. There was an explosion we heard about in Beirut. We still don't really have any confirmation as to what that is.
Also, I want to comment something else that Balir just briefly mentioned, with the elimination of the senior Hezbollah commander for the rocket and missile unit, the Nasser unit. This is the man that I want our viewers to realize was responsible for the deadly Majd al-Shams rocket attack, which killed 12 children, and many other of these attacks in the northern Golan Heights areas as well. And so this just shows how the IDF is continuing to go after these Hezbollah leaders that are responsible for these deadly incidents, especially when you come to something like the Majd al-Shams incident and many of these other attacks as well. And so by going after him, eliminating him, and really reducing the capabilities of these rocket and missile, taking out the head commander right there, this also talks about all the intelligence that the Israeli military has as well to go after these targeted eliminations.
Right. Also with, listen, it's every day there's, rockets coming over the border. It has been kind of somewhat quiet. So does that tell you that there has been more of their infrastructure taken out than maybe the IDF has publicly said?
Well, first of all, as Nicole said, the elimination of this commander of the rocket division of the Nasser unit within Hezbollah, he was in charge of the eastern sector, is a big deal. This is somebody who's been active since the 8th of October, terrorizing northern Israel, really in charge of coordinating all of these rocket attacks that Nicole just described. So that's certainly going to create damage. Now, there's a wider issue. Hezbollah's infrastructure on the border has mostly been degraded and destroyed. That was the ground invasion and mass murder plan, the Conquer the Galilee plan. That has been mostly taken out by now. And most of their rocket firepower has been destroyed from the air. Something like 2/3, 80% is gone. So what's left is this residual rocket and drone capability that's being fired from deeper into Lebanon, further north from where the forces are currently located. And obviously the Air Force is doing its best to try and take out. We're seeing assassinations, targeted killings, and the strikes that are targeting launchers and bunkers and warehouses, et cetera, et cetera. But they still have the ability to keep going. And so there's a dilemma. And the dilemma is, should Israel expand the ground offensive to get to these launchers and to the terrorists firing the rockets, or will it deal with them later as it enforces any future arrangement? Those are the two main options facing the Israeli cabinet now, and we'll have to see which one they'll choose.
Right. What do you think?
It should be interesting, and that's why we continue to see these ongoing negotiations also with the U.S. officials. However, the most recent rumblings coming out of the different U.S. proposal that they backed while these U.S. officials were in the region meeting with Lebanese and Israeli officials to try and broker some sort of a ceasefire. And now it's not going to happen before the U.S. elections. And if it doesn't happen before Tuesday, it's likely that this could just continue to push on further and further. We heard from the Lebanese parliament speaker yesterday, actually, accusing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of rejecting the U.S.-backed ceasefire. Netanyahu had no comment on that. And we heard from already the Prime Minister's office and Israel that they want a deal to go through if they are able to enforce it themselves.
Right.
And so if they are able to make sure that UN Resolution 1701 is enforced by Israel, that's the only way that they would agree to some sort of a deal, because that's the main problem with UN Resolution 1701 that's been in place for nearly 2 decades at this point. No one has enforced it. And so if Israel doesn't get that security,
and this
that they
is something
can
that's
enforce
been
it,
talked about, you know, for the
Exactly.
past year and almost a month. All right, we're going to turn to Iran now. Don't go anywhere. Despite cautious response from Iran after Israel's attack on their military sites a week ago, Iran's rhetoric about a possible retaliation has become increasingly threatening. Here's more from I-24 News correspondent Lynn Plachmeyer.
Iran has issued new threats against Israel and the U.S. after Israel struck its military sites last week.
The enemies, be it the Zionist regime or the United States of America, will definitely receive a crushing response in return for what they are doing against the Iranian nation and the resistance front.
Despite initial cautious remarks by Iran's supreme leader Khamenei, Iranian officials have been increasing their threats against Israel. Furthermore, a senior official in a pro-Iranian militia in Iraq has now said in a statement that they are fully coordinating with Tehran on a response at the, quote, appropriate time and place. Asked about Iran's threats at a press conference, U.S. Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre dodges the question, despite promising that U.S. support for Israel remains, quote, ironclad.
As you said, there are reports that Israeli intelligence suggests Iran is preparing to attack Israel from Iraqi territory in the coming days, possibly before the U.S. presidential election. Is that the U.S. view as well? I'm going to be really careful. I'm not going to your question, I'm not going to speculate or discuss intelligence assessments on this from here. But we've been very clear that Iran should not respond.
But if Iran decides to retaliate, remains to be seen.
All right, we're now going live to Washington, where we're joined by Behnam Ben Taleblu, Senior Fellow of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies. Good evening, and thank you for joining us.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
So, Iran, listen, we know it's been a week, exactly a week, and now with Iran continuing to kind of thumb their nose at us, saying we're going to retaliate for your retaliation, yet we haven't seen anything. Do you think it's a lot of talk, or is there some momentum behind what they're threatening?
Well, indeed, the fear is that there could be substance behind this crescendo of threats that we've been seeing out of Iran. Make no mistake, given the impact of the strike initially, for the first 12 to 24 hours, the regime really tried to downplay the Israeli strike, upplay Iranian air defenses, which apparently they don't really seem to be that much left, at least in the strategic side. But now the Islamic Republic's ultra-hardliners, its ultra-hardline press, and even the supreme leader have been coming out, incrementally laying the pathway for some kind of face-saving military response. The reporting about Iraq has been quite interesting, both with the militia commander and also from a few days ago, Axios. Both, unfortunately, have missed one big reality, which is that in 2018, actually, the Islamic Republic moved short-range ballistic missiles into western Iraq. So unfortunately, the ability to use Iraqi territory to carry out some kind of face-saving reprisal against Israel, or even if you try to read in between the lines of the Supreme Leader's statement today, potentially against American diplomatic or military facilities, does indeed exist.
So obviously the election is going to be happening a few days from now. How will the election, if in any way influence or not influence, what will happen with Iran in the future?
At least in terms of the attack, there's a couple ways it could influence, but in terms of a big picture on the whole host of other threats that we face from the Islamic Republic with respect to its nuclear program, in the lame duck period, that's where you have to be quite cautious. about the regime being able to escalate its nuclear threats when it feels like its conventional ones simply aren't cutting anymore. And that's something the Biden administration has struggled to deal with when, it was fully in control and in the pre-electoral cycle and the lame duck period. I certainly think that may be one area the regime is going to be quite keen on exploiting.
Right. But I mean, do you think that there is a fear? I mean, if they, they're talking a lot, but they haven't done anything, obviously, what they did with, that we all remember so well, didn't reach their target. So do you think there is some kind of embarrassment on their part that maybe they're just really not going to do anything?
Well, that could be one reason why they're moving this from Iranian territory to Iraqi territory. What the Iranians did both in terms of April and in terms of October against the Israelis, which, by the way, was defended incredibly by, the region's most important layered air and missile defense, as well as significant American military assistance to make sure those projectiles didn't make its way through. Depending on how you count, 4 warheads landed in April. Depending on how you count, upwards of 30 landed in October. Given that this is a regime that has threatened to wipe Israel off the map and has called Israel one bomb state, even one warhead here would be too many, if you ask me. But the Iranians have engaged potentially now in horizontal escalation, and they may try to spin this, given the way the Biden administration has preferenced de-escalation over deterrence, by trying to say, hey, look, it's not us directly responding, it's the militias, and try to get Israel back into the old pattern of what is a new normal.
Right. All right. Thank you very much, Behnam Ben Taleblu. Much appreciated. Back with Nicole. You're welcome. And Yaakov here in the studio. Obviously, also we're hearing about, Iraq playing a part. They have pro-Iranian, groups there that could be the basis of where a strike would come from. What is that? Anything notable, something to consider?
It's a scenario that Israeli defense planners have had to factor in for a long time, not just now. Iran has transferred an unknown quantity of missiles and drones to its Shiite militia proxies in Iraq, just as they've done to other proxies across the region. We don't know what the scope of this threat is, but one thing we do know, whatever Iran tries to do now, it's going to be taking a very big risk, without getting into their heads, because I don't think that that's actually possible. But if they go, let's say, too far, we can call it that, right now, Iran's air defenses are largely down. That means that the whole of the country is very vulnerable to Israeli counteraction. And while most of Iranian attacks or attacks by their proxies are intercepted by Israeli and allied air defenses, almost none of the Israeli attacks can be intercepted by them. So they find themselves in a totally very inferior position, extremely vulnerable. And I think they're going to have to be very careful. If they make a mistake, I think that their nuclear program and part of their oil infrastructure will be next in Israel's target list.
And do you think that was one of the reasons behind, the IDF's decision to do what they did, rather than, all the talk? Are they going to target oil rigs or
yes,
the nuclear
I think
project?
that what Israel did, what the IDF implemented, and the strategy here that was chosen by the Israeli cabinet was essentially to do this in phases. That this was only phase 1. You take down Iran's air defenses, you take down its missile production, ballistic missile production capabilities. That means that whatever missiles they fire, they're not going to be able to replace in the foreseeable future. And that puts them in a bind. It puts them in a constraint. Whatever they do, it's going to harm them. And so they have to, calculate. Now, again, I think we need to be humble about what the Iranians will decide to do. I don't think we can get into their heads. But what we can do is look at the new board, and things have changed. The balance of power has changed in Israel's favor. So whatever they do, I think Israel will have opportunities to respond and much better than ever before.
Right. Well, and I think taking the tactic they did, obviously there was a lot of U.S. pressure, to not touch any of the nuclear capabilities
just
or this. I mean, it affects the world economy.
De-escalation versus the deterrence. And we do still see this U.S. support in the region, even the U.S. announcing today with the Pentagon stating that although the USS Abraham Lincoln will be leaving the region in the coming months, there's more military assets coming to the region, B-52 the B-52 jets, fighter jets, naval destroyers, all of these assets that will be coming here in the coming months as well to help with this show of deterrence. And I think that this has helped. But it's this catch-22 that we continue to see from the United States, and whatever happens in the upcoming election could change how the U.S. views exactly how Israel should respond.
Very much a very delicate balance that could be a powder keg pretty quickly. Okay, we're going to turn to Gaza now, where the IDF has announced The death, unfortunately and sadly, of 2 Israeli soldiers killed during fighting in northern Gaza earlier today. 20-year-old Staff Sergeant Itai Perizat and 22-year-old Staff Sergeant Yair Hanania. Meanwhile, the IDF also announced that troops located and destroyed a huge Hamas underground arms manufacturing plant in a tunnel in central Gaza. The site was located in the heart of civilian population. The IDF says that they found hundreds of components used to build rockets, mortars, grenades, as well as diving equipment, the latter of which could have been used by Hamas terrorists to infiltrate Israel via the sea. The IDF also found several rooms in the tunnel where Hamas operatives could reside for long periods of time, fully equipped with kitchens, bedrooms, and even offices. So, all right, back in studio with Yaakov and Nicole. So here we are, the focus obviously on the north, but still a lot to do here. It seems that, you know, this huge tunnel infrastructure has been pretty much, destroyed, but obviously not the case, and they're still finding more and more underground tunnels.
Right. So, when the IDF decided to take on the tunnel system, which was the biggest strategic asset that Hamas had built over the years as part of its terror army, what they did was prioritize which tunnels they would destroy first. The ones that serve the leadership, the ones that are used for weapons manufacturing, et cetera, et cetera. And now what's happening is that they're getting to the other tunnels. These are less critical to the Hamas war effort, but they still have to be destroyed. And so as long as we have IDF divisions in the Gaza Strip, we will see this effort continue. It's going to go on for months, this particular effort, and possibly longer. They've just been, so many hundreds of kilometers of tunnels have been built. They didn't have the option of destroying them all at once, and therefore we're seeing this sort of list of priorities being followed.
Right, especially as, trying to get, listen, let's talk about the hostage deal. Like, I think obviously more is going to continue like what we just talked about. But, just the other night I was in Hostage Square with some of the families. It seemed that there was some hope, even though, as we all know, it's very hard to hope because look at what happened. It's just you can't have expectations because if they're not met, then it's very, very sad and disappointing. Do you think it's the end to a potential hostage deal coming through?
It's never the end, right? We're going to continue to see these mediation efforts continue, and especially with these renewed efforts within the past month, starting in October, following the killing of Yahya Sinwar, Hamas
By the way, I'm
leader.
going to interrupt you. We're seeing live images. What you're seeing on the screen is the weekly protest on Saturday. Go
and
ahead.
so we continue to see people coming to the streets, voicing their support for a deal, especially those members of the hostages' families. But just because Sinwar is now dead, there are still these complicated efforts. And this is what some of the Arab mediators, such as Egypt and Qatar, are saying, that now there's more of this decentralized leadership, and that's also complicating efforts for a deal. And Hamas is still standing their ground that they want to see a complete withdrawal of Israeli troops and a complete ceasefire before any sort of a negotiation does start. And so that's why we're still seeing this complicated effort.
Right. And with this said, I mean, obviously we had Cairo getting involved, we had the U.S., getting involved, and maybe making it more complicated that there isn't, a Sinwar, there isn't a specific person negotiating, but it doesn't just kind of go to show that they never had any intention of releasing the hostages unless Israel stopped the war. It just seems like it's just...
That was the position that Sinwar dictated. Now that he's out of the picture, I still think it's too soon to really know what the impact of his elimination will be on Hamas's negotiation stance. We have the overseas leadership in Qatar. So far, yes, they are parroting the same position that Sinwar had, which is Israel has to leave Gaza. And why? So
all or nothing. All or nothing.
So that Hamas takes back Gaza and starts rebuilding itself. That's what they're after here. And that's obviously going to be their baseline position. But the fact is that reality in Gaza has changed drastically. The Hamas terror army has been largely degraded and destroyed, and there are new opportunities potentially for Israel to start sending feelers into Gaza, into some of these hostage holders, the clans, the terrorists. It's possible to see if they can be disconnected, some of them at least, from the overseas leadership in Hamas because of this splintering effect that we're seeing. And I think, the thing that Israel has left to do here, the big play that it has left that could really change the negotiation situation, is to start making it clear that it's going to destroy what's left of Hamas's regime, political regime, the way that it takes over distribution, the way that it still tells Gazans that it's coming back. If that starts being taken apart, and this is more a political measure than a military one, even though they're interlinked, that could apply massive amounts of pressure on what's left of Hamas, and that could break their current hardline position.
Right. And, also with that said, like we said, we're back to the election that's happening this week. So I don't think anyone expected any kind of deal before or after, but it'd be interesting to see how these negotiations will, play out based on the outcome of the election. Obviously, the inauguration wouldn't be until January, but would it make a difference once we know who's going to be elected president?
And we're hearing this week the reports that former President Donald Trump, the Republican nominee, that he spoke with Prime Minister Netanyahu this week, stating that if and when he is reelected and enters the White House, he wants the war to be wrapped up by then. And we also continue to hear similar sentiments, although not as harsh, coming from Kamala Harris, but she continued to say, I want to see a ceasefire, I want more humanitarian aid. Different messaging coming from both, but you could argue that a similar goal at the end of the day. But how these two presidential candidates will get to that goal and who could be more successful in possibly pressuring the Israeli government, as well as Hamas, Egypt, Qatar, the Arab mediators, that is also still remains to be seen as to exactly which of these different U.S. officials could provide a stronger hand, perhaps, to see if they can get this done. But as you mentioned, kind of the lame duck period that Biden has, there is still room for him to continue with these negotiations as well. It doesn't just stop until January.
He has said very clearly, I want this to be done before I'm not president. So it just seems like when you're dealing with a terror organization, it's also in their interest not to get it done before the end of his presidency, because it's continuing to torture everybody.
Yeah, look, their position is, again, they see the hostages as a get out of jail card in order to save their regime and to start rebuilding their terror army. That is their fundamental interest, and obviously that's not something that the Israeli government is prepared to accept.
We're about to take a break.
Yep.
All right, don't go anywhere. Thank you all for watching. We will be back with more after the short commercial break.
Introducing the brand new I-24 News Video on Demand app.
You'll have instant access to all our programs, reports, in-depth discussions, and expert commentary.
Whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News Video on Demand app today.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. podcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back to The Rundown. I'm Emily Francis. As the U.S. presidential candidates are in the final push of their campaign, Donald Trump is vying for the Arab American vote, which could make or break the swing state of Michigan, home to the largest Arab majority city in the country. Here's more from our very own Nicole Zedek.
With just a few campaign days to go, former President Donald Trump is trying to court a section of the population that could prove crucial in the swing state of Michigan. Arab Americans discontented with how the Biden administration and Kamala Harris has tackled the war in the Middle East.
We look to a Trump presidency with hope, envisioning a time where peace flourishes, particularly in Lebanon and Palestine, maintaining the integrity of our borders. As Arab Americans, we unite against the betrayal of those in power. Our families back home suffer, their cries for help echoing across borders, while the world remains silent. It is time to prioritize our nation's best interests and foster lasting peace for all. This current administration has failed miserably in all aspects of humanity.
Dearborn, Michigan is the largest Arab majority city in the nation, and Trump is touting his past successes in the Middle East with the historic peace accords as a reason to bring him back in office, reportedly telling Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu this week the war in Gaza should be finished if and when Trump returns to office.
You're going to have peace in the Middle East, but not with the clowns that you have running the U.S. right now. You're going to have peace. You're going to have peace in the Middle East, and they should have peace in the Middle East, but not with the clowns you have in the Middle East.
Metro Detroit is an area Joe Biden won by 3-1 in 2020. But the Democrats are worried some of those votes will go to third-party candidate Jill Stein, Trump, or no one at all over what many Arab Americans view as the Biden admin's complacency over the war in Gaza.
As a Muslim American, and specifically a Palestinian American, I am utterly disappointed. It seems like neither party is interested in stopping the genocide, and they're more interested in aiding it and seeing who could aid it the most. It's almost like it's a competition on who could fund more money to Israel between Harris and Trump. And that's why people like me and many other Muslim Arab Americans will be voting third party, Jill Stein probably.
Meanwhile, the Biden administration announced Saturday it's sending more military assets to the region. B-52 bombers, fighter jets, and Navy destroyers will all be in the Middle East in the coming months to replace the Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier, which has been a major force of deterrence against Iran, as the U.S. continues to help defend Israel from its shared enemies.
Back in studio with Nicole and Yaakov. Obviously, we're here, monitoring everything with the election from here. But obviously, this is what everybody's talking about in the United States. I mean, this is a very, very important election in so many ways. First, expand on this report. It's very interesting how, what is him reaching the Arab voters? Why is that, A, so significant? And are the number of Arabs, Americans registered enough to make an influence on the outcome?
Well, when we look at the swing state like Michigan, there's some 300,000 Arab Americans that live in Michigan alone. And so when we're talking about some of these polling numbers that are coming out and show just how tight of a race it's going to be, it certainly does make an impact. Every single vote will likely count in many of these swing states. And so it's interesting what's happening right now as you're hearing from many of those different Arab Americans, and as both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump are trying to vie for these precious votes. Many of these Arab Americans say that they're facing kind of a catch-22, where they don't like either candidate. And although many of them typically have been voting Democrat their whole life, now because of the war in Gaza, and they say the complacency of the Biden administration, they don't feel confident voting for Kamala Harris. However, they also don't necessarily feel confident voting for Donald Trump. Many of them also claim that during his past presidency, there was increased Islamophobia in the United States, and so they don't feel confident with either choice. And so this leads them either voting for the Green Party candidate, Jill Stein, or not voting at all. And what what ends up actually happening in that situation is by not voting for Harris, by not voting at all, and for voting for Jill Stein, that's basically a vote for Donald Trump then.
Right.
And so he's going to end up possibly getting more of these votes or a better outcome just because people not showing up to the polls that would typically vote Democrat ends up more votes going to the Republican candidate.
So why is this that so many of them are voting for this Green Party? Like what?
Jill Stein,
it's surprising, right?
Jill Stein has built a platform, a very anti-Israel platform, and this is coming from a Jewish candidate. Jill Stein is a Jew herself, and she continues to come to these different rallies, these different protest movements as well of all of the quote-unquote stop the genocide happening in Israel, according to her own words. And so this is why she's really pandering to the Arab American votes, except by actually doing this and stating that we want to stop all of the war, we want to increase humanitarian aid. This is really what the Green Party is built on, a lot of these grassroots movements. That's why it's green. But because of that, she could actually be doing more harm possibly than good by taking away many of these votes that then aren't going to go to either
especially
candidate.
Because it's not like she's going to win anyway. So and technically it's a statement, but it's throwing a vote in the trash metaphorically, right? So what are your thoughts? I mean, this is I bet you seem surprised as well.
Yeah, look, looking at this whole, election cycle from an Israeli perspective, it's obviously first and foremost an internal American issue for Americans to decide. My hope is that whoever wins power in these elections will understand that the number one threat to the regional security situation remains Iran, that Israel needs help and assistance in dealing with that threat, and that this is part of a global confrontation that is not limited to the Middle East, but actually involves Russia. Russia and Iran have become close allies. Iran has become one of the main, firepower suppliers for the Russians to use against the Ukrainians. The same UAVs that are crashing into Kiev are being launched at us in Israel it's made in the same factory. And China is involved in this situation as well. So whoever wins, I really hope will understand that Israel is the outpost representing not only Western interests, but Western security. And this should be a bipartisan thing.
Right. I mean, why isn't this a bigger deal in the election cycle, actually addressing these things? Because, it's said all the time. I mean, this is the buck stops it here. I mean, this is the domino falls. It's going to domino all the way over every sea. And I mean, this is a worldwide issue more than just Israel. So it doesn't seem like that has been a main topic, Iran, in this election cycle.
Yeah, and also Ukraine doesn't seem to have been very important either. And these issues are directly linked, and the world is changing, and it's becoming much less secure. We're seeing the emergence of these two big blocs, and it's a very dangerous dynamic. And it seems that these elections in the U.S. are primarily focused on the economy and other issues. So. Look, at the end of the day, we have to hope that whoever wins will understand this and that these insights will be bipartisan, because I don't think that the world can afford for, to gamble on one party and then it's going to be swapped out at the next elections and then see policy changed 180 degrees. I don't think that's going to be good for the world, in any way. So that's my hope, looking on as an observer who's not involved, at all.
All right. Thank you very much, both of you, Nicole Zedek and Yaakov Lapin. Much appreciated. Now we're turning to the UK, where there's some notable news. The first black woman has been chosen as the new leader of the British Conservative Party. Kemi Badenoch has replaced former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who left office in July as the party leader. She's regarded as a firm supporter of Israel. After Israel killed Hezbollah leader Nasrallah in September, she told Sky News that the strike was, quote unquote, extraordinary. Joining us live via Zoom now is British political commentator Tom Gross. Good evening, Tom. And tell us more about this symbolic and the political importance of the first black woman leading the Conservative Party.
Yes, well, it's a remarkable achievement for her. She's 44. Although she was born in Britain, she grew up in Nigeria, in West Africa, and only really moved to Britain age 16. She didn't go to one of the big universities like Oxford or Cambridge. She is, as you say, the first black woman to lead a major British political party. She was voted in over a 3-month process by the 100,000 plus party members against 5 other candidates. And I think I should also mention that something quite interesting. In the United States, we may also have the first black female leader, Kamala Harris, in a couple of days. But Kemi Badenoch has done it all by herself, if I can put it like that. She's an outsider. She's been elected by a largely white Conservative Party electorate, purely through talent and being better than the other candidates, whereas some would say that Kamala Harris has kind of been picked to offset Joe Biden, who is, of course, old, white, and male.
So she seems like a very, very impressive woman. And then to be able to clinch that position, obviously she has it's apparently a good track record. What is it that's giving so many conservatives confidence in her?
Well, some people are comparing her to Margaret Thatcher. She's very outspoken. She knows her mind. She hasn't been frightened to address things like trans issues, which a lot of people are a little bit terrified to even mention for fear of being cancelled. So she stood up for feminism against trans issues. She stood up for Israel, as you just mentioned, in no uncertain terms. She's rejected identity politics. In the previous outgoing government, she was business secretary. She got to know, in that role, Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida, and they are quite friends now, DeSantis and Kemi Badenoch, and there's a kind of mutual admiration between the two of them. And obviously, the Conservatives lost power in Britain 4 months ago after 14 years in power to the Labour Party under Keir Starmer. So it's going to be an uphill battle to come back. But also, I think it's good for Britain in a way that she's the African female. She is actually the fourth female leader of the Conservative Party after Margaret Thatcher, Liz Truss, and Theresa May. And of course, the last leader of the Conservative Party, Rishi Sunak, was of Indian origin. So, you know, I think Britain has something to be proud of, that the Conservative Party, not the left-wing Labour Party, seems to be lacking in racism.
Right. So what do you make also, there have been quite a few pro-Palestinian protests happening today in the UK. One group held a quote-unquote die-in in front of the Prime Minister's office, as well as thousands of demonstrators going to the U.S. Embassy in London. Why the timing now? I mean, this has been going on, obviously, for the past year, but what's different this week?
Nothing different. They are obsessed. I mean, look, there are lots of other things going on in the world. For example, a week or two ago, Turkey, which is a European country, a member of NATO, bombed Kurds. And of course, Kurds are also Muslims, and they don't care less. There is a real genocide going on in Sudan, a mass genocide, a mass famine, not a kind of concocted, phony genocide that's accused against Israel. And they don't care less. They're meant to say Black Lives Matter. Well, why don't they care about Sudan? It's partly that the perpetrators in Sudan are actually Arab militias against sub-Saharan Black Africans. So they are full of hypocrisy and one-sidedness and anti-Zionism, and some would say anti-Semitism.
Also, let's turn to the BBC. I mean, we have seen throughout the course of this war, BBC, you know, throwing out a lot of headlines that are not balanced, definitely not known, seeming to be, you know, balanced and, I mean, biased against Israel in so many ways. But now there's actually a new report about staff, as many as 100 of them, writing a letter accusing the broadcaster of actually favoring Israel in this war coverage. Your thoughts on that?
Yes, it is preposterous. Okay, so 230 media professionals, including more than 100 BBC staff, have written to the Director General of the BBC, accusing the BBC of pro-Israel bias and not reporting enough on what they call crimes against humanities, genocide and apartheid. I mean, it is preposterous. Wow. We know, again, you know, what I want to say is they're digging themselves into a hole. It's not just the British that have sort of thought the BBC is becoming a laughingstock. I mean, one tweet I saw the other day from the former world chess champion, Garry Kasparov, he said, the BBC used to be the Mecca of journalism. Now it's just Mecca. Yeah. I mean, you know, some BBC staff are literally pro-Hamas, pro-Hezbollah, pro-terrorist. They become the mouthpieces of Hamas. They never even mention Emily Damari, who is a British hostage in Gaza, age 28. She's rotting and abused, and God knows what else is being done to her in Gaza. Most BBC staff have probably never heard of her.
Wow, and they've never mentioned her, huh? Wow.
Well, maybe once, I think once since October last year. It's pathetic. I don't think this letter will impress anyone. The BBC get huge public funding. They're meant to be neutral. You know, it's not an accident that often former BBC staff go and work for Al Jazeera, which is, you know, part of the Qatari dictatorship, essentially Al Jazeera, the same dictatorship that funds Hamas. So, you know, you know, the BBC used to be a wonderful institution, and it still makes good dramas and documentaries, but its news division is become you know, it's like a propaganda arm of Hamas.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, political commentator Tom Gross. Much appreciated.
You're welcome.
Even though it's been over a year since the southern town of Ofakim was rocked by Hamas's brutal terror onslaught on October 7th, the wounds are still fresh for many residents. Here's more in this next report by I-24 News correspondent Guy Azriel.
What's up? How are you?
Hi, how are you? It's good to see you, that you're okay.
Okay, thank God.
Full of emotions.
Absolutely.
This is a story of bereavement, a story of disaster and horror, but mostly also a story of heroism and hope.
Wow, what you saw that day.
When I arrived, it was after a long fight of about 3 hours.
This is the unimaginable story of Sergeant Major Itamar Ilos, a police officer, a resident of Ofakim in the south, who on the morning of October 7th went out into the unknown. A hero who was within touching distance of death itself, in a city that is sometimes forgotten among the thousands of horror stories. On the morning of that Black Sabbath, the story of Major Ilos became the focus of a pilgrimage. Reaching the source of the shooting, Ilos found himself fighting dozens of armed terrorists, with many residents and friends in his way who had already been shot by the terrorists.
I took the gun from the house and ran here to Hayaz Tamu Street. Then I suddenly saw 3 terrorists walking, calm, tall, flak jackets, carrying weapons, and I said, "God protect us." I aimed the gun in their direction, firing 2 bullets, just so that they stopped shooting at them. By a fluke, one of them got hit in the hip, and the other 2 turned and started shooting. They fired bursts at me. Then I ran here and ran on the street. I saw Rabbi Shahar. He was wounded. As I came to treat the rabbi, a terrorist entered the street, firing a burst at me from 22 meters away, and I was completely exposed.
In a nearby street, Michal Belia and her family members were horrified by the sounds of the explosion and decided to lock themselves in their house.
We heard several points of gunfire. Some were further away and some closer. We heard them getting closer, and we didn't understand what was happening, but we understood that staying here was dangerous, and we quickly ran inside back to the house. We were 11 people. My brother-in-law locked the door, drew the shutters, and we went upstairs. We went to the window that looks out. We got to the front room to try to understand what was happening. Then we saw this place right up the street. A group of soldiers approaching, and right down here, close to this fence, is a policeman named Ronnie Abu Haran. He ran with a gun drawn and basically wanted to find the source of the shooting and join these soldiers. Then we saw that the soldiers were shooting at him.
In the first minutes of the attack, the residents in their homes and the few security forces on the streets did not understand the scale of the terrorists' invasion. And many even mistakenly identified the terrorists as IDF forces.
Ronnie at that stage was hiding here behind the bin and lifted his identifying cap and yelled, "Police!" And after a second, they just got a little closer and killed him. Shot him on the spot.
Ronnie Abu Haran, a policeman and a married father of 3, was killed by the terrorists when he was one of the first to go out and protect the residents with his body and without protection. Around the corner, Itamar Ilos was also in the terrorists' line of fire. Itamar fought for the rabbi's life, while Michal and her family still shut themselves in their house, helpless, hearing horrific explosions from all sides.
We quickly ran to the room inside, where my mother-in-law and the children were. I straight away told them we had to be silent. And just after a few minutes, we heard noises downstairs, They were trying to open the door and break the shutters to enter. At this point, we heard them speak. They sounded really close already. We had a few seconds to decide what to do. My sister-in-law suggested that we hide the children under the beds. My husband said not to go outside because there were bursts of gunfire, one after the other outside. And Ariel, in fact, was the one who made the decision, saying, "Get out now." He was waiting at the entrance to the room. He was standing there with some iron rod, which he had in his hand. And basically, we had to climb. We got out of the window. Now they've destroyed it to build the safe room, but we jumped from house to house, and then we turned here. We jumped from this roof to that roof. It's about 2 meters high. We didn't notice it at all because of the commotion and stress. My sister-in-law got out of the window first. Resourcefully, she didn't go straight on. She turned aside. We actually went out to the roof at the back and ran to this roof. This low one. We were here for about 3 hours. I saw my mother-in-law coming, and Ariel didn't come out, and I really pictured in my head where he was hiding.
What do you say to little children in such moments? 3 hours must have felt like an eternity.
True. The truth is they don't talk much. We really had to be quiet because there were terrorists all over the street, and there were roofs all around. Everyone really understood the situation. Whoever had to pee, peed on himself. About food and drink, there was nothing to talk about. Just lie there and blend in with the roof. My son even told me at some point I fell asleep as if the brain had disconnected.
For 3 whole hours, the remaining members of the Bilia family lay, 6 children and 4 adults, exposed on the roof of the house and longing for help. And while Itamar continued to fight, something he will never forget, he located a soldier he did not know, lying on the road, wounded and bleeding.
I saw a soldier with an IDF uniform, regular force, rank of warrant officer. He looked at me. I said, "What's your name?" He said, "Dennis." I looked. I said, "God help us. How can a person talk with a bullet in the head?" Tearing off his sleeve to prepare emergency treatment. As I bandaged him, a terrorist came out behind us, out of a house, firing a machine gun at us. Lucky once again that the half covered us. And after that, I stood here, looking and not seeing the terrorist. He ran away. I went back to Dennis, saw he was already dying. He had to be evacuated to Soroka Hospital, but the ambulances weren't coming. I looked around, saw the Honda Civic car, arrived at Soroka. The doctors took him. I returned to Ofakim. I took my cell phone, took my identification hat, and went out again.
On returning to the Har-Geffen neighborhood, Itamar joined other forces. There they noticed something unusual in one of the houses.
There was the officer who also climbed the wall there and peeked. Suddenly, we both get up. We saw the family up on the roof.
My husband raised his head a little and started trying to make eye contact with the soldiers who were here on the street. After some time, a soldier arrived. He walked 2 steps towards the window. And actually, he already saw the body of... He saw Ariel's body.
As they learned for the first time about the loss of Ariel, Michal's sister-in-law, none other than Itamar emerges on the roof in order to rescue the remaining family members.
The Bilia family, 10 people, they were huddled there. Children 4 years old, 5 years old, 7 years old. A 1-month-old baby girl.
And while the family members were being rescued, Itamar continued to fight another terrorist who remained in the house.
Next to Ariel's body, I moved to the roof of the housing unit. I stood over there, waiting for him to come out. I saw the terrorist coming out with his hands up, shirtless.
This is the story of a bloody city and its shocked inhabitants, on their way to healing and rebuilding. The story of a partnership of fate and trauma that will forever be engraved in the history of the place.
What strengthened me and strengthens me is to see life. You see the rabbi. The rabbi, blessed be he, is alive, and Dennis is alive. Dennis is also a miracle. Hospitalized for 6 months? I don't know, in my opinion, he's crazy. But this lunatic returned to the army. This city, its slogan before October 7th was, Ofakim, a city of people. Because people here are really warm people. You will fall here in the street, 10 people will jump up to see what is happening to you. After October 7th, they realized that this slogan, it should be changed to Ofakim, a city of heroes. Because really the terrorists didn't understand either, didn't believe that they would fight them. In their death, they commanded us life. It is in their death that they commanded us life. We live thanks to them, thanks to those who died. It's something you enter into this sentence. It's a sentence that has taken on so much meaning in my eyes, that I was privileged to be alive and tell their story. Some rabbi says to me that what the verse says is about you, I will not die because I will live and tell of his deeds. So I'm not dead. I stayed alive to tell of the deeds of the people who were here.
Wow, so many heroic stories in light of the tragedy of October 7th. I'm Emily Francis. Thank you so much for watching I-24's The Rundown, and have a great rest of your weekend. Take care.
Shalom. ¿Qué me trae por aquí? La necesidad impostergable de 600 millones de hispanoparlantes que ahora necesitan escuchar el mensaje judío e israelí en tiempos difíciles. ¿Cómo lograrlo? Cuento con ustedes para continuar llevando a lo más alto del mundo mediático una inquebrantable diplomacia pública al servicio de la verdad sin concesión alguna.
Want to stay on top of the news no matter where you are?
Introducing I-24 News' brand new news website.
On our website, you'll find all the latest articles, interviews, and live broadcasts. Everything you need to know right at your fingertips, whenever you want it.
So what are you waiting for? Download the I-24 News app today.
Bienvenidos a News 24, el magazine de análisis y noticias en español de i24 News. Yo soy Nicole Michel. En el Teatro Campo Amor de Oviedo se cumple una década desde que Felipe VI dio el relevo a Leonor de Borbón, que lo está haciendo fantástico como presidenta honoraria de los premios Princesa de Asturias 2024. Este año debo confesar que como periodista me contentó mucho que el premio Princesa de Asturias de Comunicación y Humanidades lo recibiera la historietista, pintora y directora franco-iraní Marjan Satrapi. Ella es una figura internacional del cómic. Suya es una de las novelas gráficas más importantes de las últimas décadas, Persépolis, pero también es un símbolo mundial del anhelo y la búsqueda de la libertad, así también como el compromiso cívico liderado por las mujeres y una voz esencial para la defensa de los derechos humanos. Me encantó su discurso, y más aún cuando desde estos estudios en Tel Aviv, cubriendo en terreno de norte a sur, un Israel en guerra y a lo lejos, no tan lejos, ver un pueblo gazatí ciertamente sufrido ante la opresión del yihadismo, al igual que el Líbano, donde, como me relató el argentino israelí secuestrado por Hamas y rescatado por el ejército israelí, Luis Har, en su síndrome de Estocolmo, con uno de sus captores, a ellos les enseñaron desde pequeño en sus casas y en las escuelas a odiar a los judíos, y logré una empatía con mi captor de Hamas, que un día llegó a decirme: quizás un día podría visitarte a tu kibutz y hacer pizzas contigo. Luis es pizzero. Su experiencia es el reflejo gráfico de lo que Marjan Satrapi dijo en su discurso. ¿Estaremos equivocados cuando definimos educación? Quizás antes de educar a nuestros hijos para que tengan éxito económico y social, deberíamos enseñarles que el verdadero éxito radica sobre todo en el humanismo. Por otro lado, el premio Princesa de Asturias de las Artes, Joan Manel Serrat, dijo: creo en el respeto del derecho ajeno y el diálogo como la única manera de resolver los asuntos justamente. Aquí, entre israelíes y palestinos, se ha intentado mucho esto del diálogo, pero son varias las fallas alrededor. Y no se trata de juzgar, sino de comprender, como diría Baruch Espinosa. Ciertamente Serrat dice que no le gusta el mundo en el que vivimos, hostil, contaminado e insolidario. Yo pienso que mejor ante el no me gusta, podríamos decir: ¿qué me gustaría hacer ahora por este mundo? Implacable y estratégico. Así fue la respuesta de Israel ante Irán, con potentes explosiones en zonas militares de Teherán como respuesta a los 200 misiles del régimen iraní contra territorio israelí. Hay que considerar que el régimen de Irán y sus proxies en la región han estado atacando implacablemente a Israel desde el 7 de octubre, en 7 frentes, incluidos ataques directos desde suelo iraní. Para analizar esta situación que define la actual geopolítica de Medio Oriente, tenemos con nosotros al analista de origen iraní, Meir Javendanfar. Gracias por estar con nosotros, Meir, en i24 News.
Gracias.
Veíamos a un Irán con mucho respeto, por no decir miedo, y de repente 100 aviones de la Fuerza Aérea Israelí entraron en territorio iraní. Cumplieron su misión. Entre esos aviones, por supuesto, que volvieron a casa después. No fue un ataque contra la población iraní, fue un preciso ataque militar. ¿Crees que el mensaje le llegó al ayatollah Ali Khomeini?
Este fue un éxito fenomenal de la Fuerza Aérea de Israel, este ataque. Y el régimen iraní ahora entiende que su modelo proxy ya no funciona. Ya no puede esconderse atrás de grupos como Hezbollah y Hamas para atacar a Israel. Desde el 7 de octubre y desde que el régimen iraní empezó a atacar a Israel directamente, Israel no solamente va a atacar a los proxies del Irán, a los grupos quien Irán apoya, pero también el Estado de Israel va a atacar a las instalaciones y bases militares del régimen de Ayatollah Khamenei, que Israel va a debilitar su sistema antiaviones, como lo hizo en este ataque recién, y para dejar la puerta abierta para el próximo ataque de Israel. Este ataque recién de Israel tenía un impacto fenomenal no solamente sobre las instalaciones de Irán, pero también hizo daño a las fábricas donde producen misiles balísticos y también drones que el régimen iraní usa directamente contra Israel y también lo provee a sus aliados para atacar a Israel.
Meir, entendemos, vemos y hemos visto que el presidente iraní Masoud Pezeshkian ha asegurado que Estados Unidos está detrás de las acciones de Israel y reitera que Irán responderá apropiadamente al ataque israelí. Él dice, no buscamos la guerra, pero daremos una respuesta. ¿Cómo lo interpretas?
Señor Pezeshkian no es una persona muy poderosa en Irán. El presidente Pezeshkian fue elegido para mejorar la situación económica de Irán. Pero el opósito está pasando. Desde que él fue elegido hace 2 meses, el dinero iraní cayó 12% contra el dólar. El precio del pan ha subido por lo menos 40% en 2 meses desde que él entró a la oficina presidencial en calle Luis Pastor en Teherán. También leche ha subido 20%. Él no ha hecho nada, no ha tenido ningún éxito y no ha cumplido con sus promesas que va a resolver problemas del ciudadano iraní. Y él está también diciendo cosas que lo digan, como Irán no está buscando guerra. Por amor de Dios, este régimen ha estado buscando la guerra contra Israel desde por lo menos 1991 a través de sus proxies, pero ahora esta guerra que el régimen iraní empezó desde el 91 a través de Hezbollah Hamas, ahora está llegando a su territorio.
Ahora bien, ¿cómo está la actual situación militar iraní? Vemos que la diferencia con Israel es significativa en cuanto a la tecnología que Israel tiene a nivel militar.
Ellos todavía pueden disparar misiles. Todavía el régimen iraní es un peligro significativo contra Israel, un peligro estratégico, no es existencial, pero es el peligro más serio, un peligro estratégico. Es un régimen que está dispuesto a ayudar a cualquier grupo o individuo que quiera matar israelíes. Y todavía tiene misiles que nos puede hacer daño, nos puede amenazar, puede matar ciudadanos. También tiene una industria muy fuerte de la defensa. Ellos cualquier cosa, cualquier armamento, sea drones, sea misiles extranjeros que llega a Irán, ellos pueden copiar y producir un nuevo modelo, a veces mejor del copia que recibieron desde otro país. Entonces todavía es un peligro muy serio, pero ahora si esta guerra sigue así entre Irán y Israel, el régimen iraní tendrá que reconsiderar sus políticos en relación con Israel, porque ahora